Although the actions of his 63 BC consulship pegged him as a conservative, Marcus Tullius Cicero was more of a centrist. As a constitutionalist, Cicero's policies and voting record often appeared to align with the arch-conservatives who, in the aftermath of the Catilina conspiracy, had united to seize the obvious political opportunity. But unlike Cato, who seemed to regard all attempts at reform as purely anti-conservative, it is likely that Cicero did not view himself as an arch-conservative. Cicero's objections to proposed legislation were usually based on his comprehension of the logistics, cost to implement, drain on Rome's treasury, or the perceived long-term effects on Rome's populace, Senate, or the health of the Republic. It was Cicero's common-sense brand of conservatism which drew Julius Caesar, in late 60 BC, to schedule a meeting with him. Having already won election to the consulship for the 59 BC year, Caesar was planning the takedown of the arch-conservative bloc that had claimed his triumph. Caesar offered Cicero a role within an alliance he wished to create with two other ex-consuls, Pompeius Magnus and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Caesar promised he would defer to Cicero and Pompeius in all things, and diligently worked to stop the constant feuding between Pompeius and Crassus, who had blocked legislation that benefited the people, because of personal grudges. With the four of them working together, Caesar proposed, the arch-conservative faction which now gridlocked the Senate, could be broken up in favor of a balanced, counter-coalition. With the interests of the Publicani represented by Crassus, and the interests of the legions represented by Pompeius, the only representation lacking in Caesar's balanced coalition was the equalizing influence of a popular conservative. Caesar viewed Cicero, the father of the Republic, as that equalizing force. Great status, along with enviable rewards, could be enjoyed equally by each of the quadrivirs, along with the knowledge that together, they could represent Rome's various factions, ensuring their needs weren't being blunted by senatorial cliques in private wars with one another. Not only concerned that the Senate's conservatives, who now called themselves the Boni, or good men, would withdraw their support from him, but also fearing that such an alliance, in and of itself, was a threat to the very integrity of the Republic, Cicero turned Caesar down. Caesar's quadrumvirate, instead, became a triumvirate. In January of 59 BC, Caesar successfully passed his land reform bill. Cicero supported the Boni against Caesar's heavy-handed methods, which included the arrest of an opposing senator, voting on legislation which did not bear the Senate's signature, and ignoring the junior consul's veto of the voting assembly. Additionally, though they could not prove Caesar's complicity, the public's insurrection, which caused bodily injury to a consul of Rome, whose imperium made his person sacrosanct, was a violation of everything sacred within the Republic. Upon passing his land reform bill, Caesar began filling the seats of the Quinquevirate, or Board of 20. We do not know everyone who filled the 20 seats of his land commission, but Marcus Attius Balbus, who was a cousin to Pompeius, and who was married to one of Caesar's older sisters, was given a seat. Other names included Marcus Terentius Varro, a supporter of Pompeius, Gaius Cosconius, and Gnaeus Tremellius Scrofa. From within the Board of 20, a Vigintivirate, or Board of 5, was formed. This sub-commission of the Board of 20 held sway over the remaining 15 members and, with it, the appropriate rank and rewards. Although Caesar, himself, was barred from holding a seat on this powerful board, Pompeius Magnus and Marcus Licinius Crassus served along with Marcus Valerius Messala Niger. We do not know who the final two seat holders were. In April of Caesar's consular term, Cicero, along with the Boni, and the rest of the Senate, received confirmation of what they had suspected since January. When Pompeius Magnus married Caesar's daughter, Julia, all Rome knew they were formal allies. Cicero wasted no time in attacking this new regime, which moved him closer to the Boni, who, themselves, were calling Pompeius and Caesar, the king and queen of Rome, imitating the rumor regarding Caesar's relationship with King Nicomedes. In response, Caesar, in his capacity as Pontifex Maximus, granted a special dispensation to Cicero's neighbor and enemy, Publius Clodius Pulcher, to be formally adopted into a plebeian household. There was only one reason a patrician, especially one with the reputation of Publius Clodius, would renounce such illustrious ancestry. he intended to run for tribune of the plebs. And, to Cicero's horror, he knew Clodius would win. It was after Caesar legalized the adoption of Clodius that he summoned Cicero to another meeting. A seat on the board of 20 had just become available due to the death of Gaius Cosconius, and Caesar offered it to Cicero, along with all the perks the position provided. This office was not nearly as illustrious, or powerful, as the seat on the board of 5 that Caesar first offered Cicero, but it would at least protect Cicero from his enemies through intimate association with Caesar and Pompeius. And though Cicero later wrote that he could have joined and, by doing so, quote, enlist a most powerful defender against the wickedness of my enemies, I preferred to hold my ground against all the blows of fortune, end quote. Once again, Cicero turned down what he later referred to as Caesar's summons into a dead man's shoes. For testifying against him at trial, Clodius was coming. Easily elected tribune of the plebs, Clodius composed a list of legislation designed to please the people, and improve his own political strength and power. After his Lex Clodia de Reg Ptolomeo, which exiled the head of the bony to 2 years of administrative work that could have been done by any junior magistrate, Clodius launched into his agenda. Among the first of his bills was the Lex Clodia de Sodalititibus. This law legalized Rome's multiple colleges which, as independent gangs, ran various neighborhoods throughout Rome. Because many of the colleges had been designated as semi-political during the previous century, they had been given the right to carry arms such as clubs and cudgels. During the dictatorship of Sulla, whose goal was to strengthen the conservative Senate, and weaken the people's voice in government, these semi-political colleges were abolished, although they continued to operate in the shadows. Publius Clodius overturned Sulla's law, and once again, these armed gangs became legal. As a gang leader himself, Clodius earned the loyalty of the independent colleges. No longer just a gang leader, Publius Clodius Pulcher, by becoming de facto leader of all Rome's gangs, was now king of the streets. With armed gangs patrolling the streets, in the guise of protecting the common people from abusive laws created by conservative senators, the Senate was too afraid to block his next legislation, the Lex Clodia Frumentaria. This law took Gaius Gracchus's state-subsidized grain dole, which had been quadrupled in size by Cato's attempt to co-opt populari social programs into the camp of the optimates, and made it free. Between Cato and Clodius, Rome's poor now received 4 times the normal ration, and didn't have to pay even the smallest percentage. By feeding the poor and filling the streets with an army the people considered their own, Clodius's popularity skyrocketed. Adding the Lex Clodia de Labortanorum suffrages extended the voting rights and privileges of Rome's ex-slaves who normally, upon manumission from slave to freedman, had restricted voting rights. Now even more people could vote for Clodius's laws. And though Clodius had not yet revealed his endgame, Cicero knew something was coming. During the first quarter of the 58 BC year, Cicero stopped getting his hair cut, and began wearing clothing which would help him blend better into the crowd, rather than the ex-consul's pristine white toga which distinguished him from the common people. But his attempt to blend into the crowd did not work. Cicero, who was once applauded in the streets of Rome, and hailed father of the Republic, was now ridiculed and mocked, spat on, and harassed, often forcing him, for safety's sake, to take quick refuge within the house of any nearby supporters. Having removed Cato from the bony, Clodius continued dealing with the arch-conservatives by passing his Lex Clodia de Auspices. Aimed at the religious manipulations of Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, the Lex Clodia de Auspices outlawed magistrates, who were not members of Rome's religious colleges, from interpreting omens as a means of disrupting public assemblies. A man, just because he was elected to the consulship, did not suddenly become a priest, with knowledge equal to those who studied omens within the College of Pontiffs. But a law passed in 150 BC had given elected magistrates the right to interpret signs and cancel public assemblies. And even though Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus was a member of the College of Pontiffs, the law was overturned to prevent just anyone, with no religious training, from using religion to give themselves a political advantage. Now, only pontiffs, like Caesar, maintained the political edge to manipulate religion for personal gain. Finally, by April, with the streets of Rome under his control, and the Senate properly kowtowed, Clodius legislated his coup d'état with the Lex Clodia de Civibus Romanis Interemptus. This law threatened exile to any person within 400 miles of Rome, who offered fire or water to someone guilty of having executed Roman citizens without trial. Suddenly everyone pulled back from Cicero, the very consul who had tied nooses around the necks of those accused in Catilina's conspiracy, forcing them to jump to their deaths before legally ascertaining their guilt. Cicero argued that the Senatus Consultum Ultimum indemnified him against prosecution for actions taken in preservation of the Republic. Additionally, Cicero had tied the Senate's fate to his own by allowing a vote to be taken. The conspirators were executed by senatorial consensus. But Rome's senators, now facing the prospect of exile themselves, shrunk back, none coming to Cicero's defense, likely telling themselves that, despite the vote, it was Cicero who performed the executions. Threatened in the streets, and now a pariah among his senatorial colleagues, Cicero journeyed to Caesar, who was on his way to Gaul. In Caesar's command tent, Cicero begged Caesar to help him. Caesar responded with feigned pity for Cicero's situation, but argued that, because he was not even in Rome, there was really nothing he could do. Cicero, of course, got the message. Caesar had invited him, not once, but twice, to work with him, and now Cicero was paying the price for his honor. That no help was forthcoming from his longtime friend, Pompeius Magnus, also demonstrated that the triumvirs were of one mind, and Cicero was obviously in their way. Cicero fled Rome. By May of 58 BC, he was in Thessalonica. In his absence, Clodius legalized his exile. Then, after buying a portion of Cicero's property in order to expand his own house, Clodius convinced the Senate to confiscate the rest. Cicero's house, which had been built by tribune of the plebs, Marcus Livius Drusus, was completely demolished. And, just in case Cicero should find some way to return and rebuild, Clodius legislated to have the land upon which his house had stood, consecrated as holy, and dedicated to the goddess Libertas, or Liberty, with the erection of a small temple.